Welcome to Your ADHD Life. This is Dr. Kirsten Milliken. Today I'm talking with Brendan Mahan about the web of learning in an ADHD world. We're going to talk about the barriers between people and within people that can keep us from reaching our potential and some strategies for overcoming them. Brendan will also talk about how he coaches his clients. Enjoy the show. So Brendan, welcome to Your ADHD Life.
Thank you. I've been in it for a while now. I feel like I've been in my ADHD life for 40 years. So
I got a few years on you in my ADHD life. Thank you for starting like that. So for those of you who don't know Brendan, I just want to tell you, I'm excited about this because I found out something new when I asked him to do this podcast, which is he's a former teacher.
Yep.
And maybe if I was on his website and getting into things deep, I would have known that. But I know that now. And he was also a guidance counselor.
Yep.
And now he's an ADHD coach, which I did know.
Yeah.
And he's a consultant and speaker, which I also knew because you present at different conferences that I've seen. So Brendan actually works with families and kids who are affected by ADHD. And he has a new podcast called the ADHD Essentials podcast.
Yeah.
Congratulations on that.
Thank you. I'm pretty excited about it. And
Yeah.
I'm still, I mean, it's been a steep learning curve and I'm still on that curve a little bit, but it's cool. The hardest part for me is the technical end, is the editing and all that stuff. Talking to people.
Harder than it has to be.
Yeah, I probably do.
We can talk about that later. I don't know how it is for you. You have ADHD, right?
Yep.
For me, I have a big thing with efficiency.
Mm-hmm.
So I like to create like strategies or templates for everything so that I'm as efficient as possible. And that includes like creating the podcast. Also, for those of you who don't know, I do veteran exams for military veterans, and working in a VA hospital, one of the worst things you could possibly do is be efficient. And so when you think about all the ways that ADHD can work against you sometimes, that was not one of the ones that I expected to be a problem.
Right.
But it was in that setting. So.
Yeah, I'm sort of the opposite, where I tend to take on a task and I jump into it and I start doing it. And then I'm like, oh, there is a better way to do this. Like there is a more efficient way to do whatever it is that I'm doing. And then it's a matter of hoping I can find the time to implement whatever the more efficient method is. But often, because I'm not doing it efficiently enough, I don't have enough time to implement the efficiency strategies.
Oh, that definitely happens to me too.
Yeah.
And then it just becomes a pain.
Right.
So, yeah, trying to figure it out. Because it does take extra time. It's like teaching somebody else to do it.
Right. And it's completely worth it.
I already know.
Yeah, it's completely worth it in the long run to take the 2 hours to figure out how to do something more efficiently, because you earn those 2 hours back in a week, right?
Yeah.
But you have to find those 2 hours.
I know. So tell me about, I want to go to you being a teacher and guidance counselor, because recently, this is not all about me. I will make it about you, I promise. But you know that some people know that recently I took a real estate course to get my realtor's license because I don't have enough to do in my day. And as part of that exercise, I thought, I'm going to be screwed because I'm taking this class with a lot of younger people. And I'm getting older and my memory feels like it's really bad now. So I better make sure and use really good learning strategies to memorize all of this stuff. And what I learned in studying about learning was that it's a lot different. Really learning takes a lot more effort than I was taught when I was younger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's because we're sort of straddling the line between learning and teaching, and they're not exactly the same. Right. They inform each other and they work together, but they're not completely the same. So learning, I like to think of learning as almost like a web, right? And when you first get a concept, that's new, you have like one little strand on the web, and there's not much for the other information to stick to. But as you get new ideas, you get another strand and another strand and another strand until finally you actually have a web. And now, anytime you hear information that's related to the thing that you know about that you've got that web for, it's getting caught in that web, and you're making new connections, and you're making coming up with new ideas, and it gets a lot easier.
Right.
So that, I mean, that's the steep learning curve I was talking about, right? Is it takes a while to get those web lines nailed down, but once you have them there, they're catching all kinds of stuff like a net. And you add more lines, and that means there's more intersections between concepts. And all of a sudden you get a very robust and rich understanding of whatever it is that you're working on. So,
and I think that the thing that I was finding was the old strategies. I mean, like when I was in high school and college, the objective was to learn the stuff for the test, to get a good grade on the test and pass the class.
mm-hmm.
It wasn't about then connecting whatever you learned to anything in
Right,
real
yeah.
life, right?
But that's how you learn.
In passing tests.
Yep. And that's not how you learn. The way you learn is by connecting the things that you're doing to real life and thinking about how you would implement them and use them and apply them. If you can't take a concept and move it from one domain to another, you haven't really learned it.
Exactly. So I'm interviewing Swen Nader, who's a former NBA basketball star who was coached by Coach Wooden. And he actually wrote a book, Swen did, called You Haven't Taught Until They've Learned.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what it's called. But that's the concept anyway.
Yeah.
And that's, but then you have to define what learning is.
Right.
Which is what we're talking about now. So let's go back to, because we're talking about ADHD now.
Mm-hmm.
And with learning, you've got memory issues, and you've got, like I'm great at details, but doing the big picture and making those connections to create that web is sometimes a little bit more difficult.
Mm-hmm.
I know for me and for other people, sometimes I just talk about me because it's
it's okay.
So self-centered. So can you talk to me about some of the strategies that maybe speak to this for kids and adults with ADHD?
Yeah. We have, I like to start with the technology that we have now, right? Yeah. I've encountered so many teachers who are like, so many students who are like, I can't learn from my teacher. He doesn't understand things in a way I understand them. He doesn't explain things in a way that lets get into my head. Like, I don't know what's going on. I had a few kids that had a science teacher in particular that struggled with him.
Yeah.
And so I would say to them, look, just watch YouTube videos.
Yep.
Just whatever concept you're studying, go watch a YouTube video about it.
Yep.
And if you're stuck and the YouTube video isn't working, go up to your teacher and say, I can't stay after on whatever day your teacher stays after for extra help, right? If the teacher's after on Thursday, just say, I can't stay after on Thursdays. Can you recommend a different science teacher that I could stay after with that's doing the same stuff that would be able to help me out to understand and learn these concepts that I'm struggling with?
Yeah.
Because if you go and say, I'm not getting it, they're going to say, stay after school with me. But you already know that isn't going to work because they're explaining it to you in a way that isn't working for you. So see if you can stay after with someone else and get it from a new angle.
That's an interesting idea.
Yeah. Yeah. I used to, I had a student when I taught English, who couldn't understand math. She was dying in math. She was getting like a D. And so I was like, I can explain it to you. Like, I'm an English teacher, but if you tell me what you're studying, it's only 6th grade math. I probably know it. Like, I can probably figure it out. And so we brought her, between myself and the math teacher, and the student herself, we got her from a D to a B- in the span of a term because I explained it different. And that was all.
Do you find that there are particular themes that are happening when kids who have learning differences aren't getting it from the teachers that they're in class with?
Yes. So there's sort of teacher themes and student themes that happen, right? And by themes, I'm really placing blame. right? Like that's what this is. That's how this is going to come across.
What? No, just what's the barrier? Let's talk
yeah.
about the barriers.
Well, the barrier on the kid end, right?
Yep.
Is low frustration tolerance.
Yes.
A lot of the time, either because they've been down this road 100 times and they already know it's not going to work, which, okay, but now you're not trying as hard. So of course it's not going to work because you're not trying as hard because you're already frustrated from 3, 4, 5 years of this not working for you because you've been doing the same thing over and over again.
Right.
So often they need a new strategy. They need a new approach.
Yep.
But to start that new strategy and that new approach, they have to get past the frustration tolerance. They have to navigate that.
Yep.
And it's rare that teachers point that out to kids. And it's a really important thing to get pointed out. Like, this is what's going on. This isn't about you not being able to do math. This is about the emotions that come up when you sit down in a math class or when you sit down to study math.
Right.
So that's some of the stuff on the kid side, is the emotion side, needing new strategies. And how do you get those new strategies if you're not willing to try anymore because you've failed too much?
I mean, you're essentially shut down.
Right.
So when when you're energized and you're optimistic and all that, your brain operates very differently than when you are
it's the wall of awful. It's that wall of awful model that I talk about.
Right.
And on the teacher side, sometimes it's the wall of awful. Sometimes it's like, this kid looks like 100 other kids you've taught that also didn't get it. And you're already frustrated with them, even though you've only been teaching them for a week. Sometimes it's a depth of knowledge problem. Like, this is why great basketball players often don't make good coaches.
Yeah.
Because you're so good at whatever it is that you're doing. You understand it so well that you don't know how to teach it. You can't break it down to a small enough degree for the kid who's really struggling.
That's interesting, because one of the things as I was learning about learning was that sometimes people who are the most proficient at something are the worst people to teach it, because they have learned it to such an extent that they take a lot of things for granted.
Right.
You know, like, why can't you just, like, this is an easy concept, and they forget that even for them long ago, it wasn't, obvious or an easy concept. So breaking it down to those smaller bits is harder. Yep.
And even teachers who are trained to break it down into smaller concepts can struggle with that sometimes.
Yep.
Like in elementary school, that's natural to them. But once you get into middle school and high school, there's a level of like, you should just get this, like, what's going on.
Yeah.
So.
Yep. So there's the internal thoughts that each participant has about themselves and about the other person and about maybe the topic of math or whatever it is that they're taking on in general. And those are the things that you talk about, the wall of awful, that kind of block everybody. What about the relationship?
Like parent or student to teacher relationship that entered.
So maybe I should back that up and change the question, which would be, what facilitates breaking down the walls?
Yeah.
Those thoughts.
So when I was doing my guidance counseling work, one of the things, and I even do it as a coach, one of the, I guess, assignments I would give to students is, your job is to have 3 interactions with whatever teacher you hate. Like, whatever teacher is the one that is not working for you.
Yep.
You have to have 3 interactions over the course of a week with them that has nothing to do with the subject. Don't talk about history, right? Yep. Get to know your teacher as a person and have them get to know you as a person, because it will fundamentally change your interaction. And then the kids always look at me like, how do I even do that? And I'm like, look around. Do they have a Celtics poster on their wall? Talk to them about the Celtics. Do they have a Game of Thrones mug? Find out what Game of Thrones is and ask them about it, right? Don't watch it because you're a kid, unless you're in high school, and then I guess it's okay. But that's the kind of stuff that I would do. I would have them, one, they're being detectives. They're learning some social skills in terms of how to understand what they can about a person before they talk to them.
Yep.
And 2, those interactions make the teacher see the kid as a person and the kid see the teacher as a person. And that changes stuff, because now it's not, my teacher hates me and the only evidence I have of that is that I have a D in the class. doesn't mean your teacher hates you. It means you're not understanding the concepts or you're not doing the work. That has nothing to do with how your teacher feels about you.
Right.
So that's a major step. So
when I go home tonight, my son is telling me that his English teacher just doesn't get it. And so I'm thinking I'm gonna challenge him to maybe have a conversation with the teacher about something other than English.
Yeah, and then have him report back to you what he learned.
Yeah,
because otherwise you won't do it.
Absolutely. I had another question and now it went out of my head because I started having this image of my son last night telling me about his teacher and how frustrated he was. And I said, he said, I ask a question and she just gives me the same answer again. And I said, well, ask another question. He's like, I've tried. And I'm like, yeah, I can hear those negative thoughts. Like, it's not going to do me any good. What's the point? He even, I don't know where he gets this from, said, I'm already really good at English. Well, I'm not learning anything in the class that I don't already know. I was like, oh no, you're only 14. You can't know everything there is to know about English.
Seems unlikely. And actually, as a former English teacher, this is what you tell him, right?
Yeah.
Does he play any sports?
No.
Okay. I'm sorry, video games?
He's a video game kid, yeah.
Okay, so you can kind of work it with that. Because English doesn't work the same way that history and science and math work. History, science, and math, there's always new concepts coming up, right? That's not English. English doesn't really always have new concepts coming up. Right. What you're doing is you're practicing and getting better at the skill of writing and the skill of reading. It's different. It's like playing video games, where the more you play video games, the better you are at playing video games, even though it's the same thing over and over again.
All right,
or
now
basketball.
I feel like a really good mom, because that's essentially what I said to him last
night. You're completely right. You're completely right.
I said, I said, I use it every day. You think that this, like writing a book report, in your future, you're never going to have to write a book report. I said, I write reviews on articles. I said, I write reports for people. I write blog posts. I said, and while it may not be about a book, like there are skills that you're learning, how to summarize something, how to create your own voice, and all these kinds of things, convey thoughts.
Yeah, how to hook an audience. Right.
Oh, well, glad I said the right thing. So tell me about some of the programs that you're developing in your coaching practice. Who are you working with?
I work with adults and I work with families. So it's like probably 30% of my clients right now are adults and the other 70% are kids and families.
Yeah.
And it's the way I work with them is different, obviously, because adults have different needs than families do. Yeah. But on the adult side, a lot of it is productivity and how do I do the thing that I need to do, and how do I learn to trust myself again, because I've failed enough that I don't trust myself anymore. Yeah. And I'm really angry with myself and I just can't do this anymore. How do I do it? I'm overwhelmed. And so helping them recognize the little wins matter. Yeah. Like, yeah, I get it. You need to write a thesis, but you're not going to write a thesis tomorrow if you don't first do the dishes. Like, the dishes counts as a little win. You have to build up those little wins and rebuild your trust. And then you're going to feel like you can tackle the thesis. Yeah. And there's a fair amount of like managing clutter and managing communication with people at work or people in the house. Because you start to take things personal, you start to get defensive, and how do we help you feel less defensive so you can have more open communication with the people you work with? And that communication does not have to be about ADHD.
No.
It's just about whatever's going on at work, but you have to be able to take the criticism. You have to be able to own up to the mistakes that you've made and say, yeah, that thing I said would be done today isn't done, but I'll have it done in 2 days or whatever. Don't say tomorrow, because that's not going to happen. And then with families, it's, in a lot of ways, it's a much bigger nut to crack, because it's a system problem as opposed to an individual problem. Yeah. And with adults, there's often system stuff happening too.
Right.
But with families, I generally start with my clients by teaching them about ADHD.
Yep.
It takes about 2 hours because I've pared it down and become pretty efficient with it.
Yep.
Sometimes that 2 hours is all in one sitting, and sometimes it's not. It depends on the age of the kid and what they can handle and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But that 2 hours, that initial consultation around with where I'm teaching them about ADHD is enormously powerful.
Wow.
Because I'm sitting at a kitchen table because I make house calls. It's the best way to go. I get a lot of information that way.
I love the idea of house calls.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
cool.
So I'm sitting at a kitchen table and I literally have a checklist.
Yep.
And I'm like, this is the checklist. We do not have to stick to this checklist. I ask them to interrupt me. I'm like, I want you to interrupt me because I understand ADHD and I don't want this thought comes through your head that's actually really important, but you don't want to interrupt me. So you don't say anything and you forget all about it. And it doesn't come up again until we've been working together for 4 months. And if I had known that 4 months ago, everything would be different.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
So I invite them to interrupt me. I let them know that's the purpose of the checklist. We talk about how I am not a magic bullet. I cannot fix ADHD. I cannot cure ADHD. This is going to be a long road.
Yep.
There's going to be days when you're amazing, and there's going to be days when you don't understand why they let you out of the house. Like, that's just the nature of ADHD. And we want to get 10% better each day. And you're not even going to do that, but that's the goal, is roughly 10% better each day. And the compounding interest of that 10% will really matter a year from now. Yep. And then I go through ADHD and I talk about what it is, and we talk about dopamine and executive functioning and how do you get somewhere on time and that kind of stuff. And we talk about the wall of awful, and we talk about lifestyle and ways to manage ADHD. And as they bring up challenges, I'm tackling individual stuff with smaller scale concepts. And it's incredibly validating for the person who has ADHD.
Yeah.
Sometimes they feel good about that, and sometimes they cry. Depends.
Yeah.
And the parents often, I had a dad who sat there dumbfounded for an hour as I worked, and their daughter was in college. Mom, dad, and the daughter were, and daughter's in college, and dad sat there just dumbfounded for like an hour. And and didn't say anything. The other two are talking to me. Dad's just staring at me with this overwhelmed look on his face.
Yep.
And I finally turned to him and I was like, do you have any thoughts or anything you want to add? And he said, no, it's like you're giving us a roadmap to our daughter.
Yeah.
And I wish we had met you years ago.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's great. I mean, that's on my website now. Is that phrase?
Yeah, it's
because
awesome.
That's amazing. And all I was doing was teaching them about ADHD. So I roll into these houses and I'm like, this is how ADHD works. And people are blown away by how well I know them.
Yep.
Like, I don't know you.
Yep.
I know a piece of you. I don't know what your hobbies are.
Yep.
I just
it's
know.
Not rocket science, though. Yeah, if you know what it is.
Yeah, I know your struggle.
Manual, the DSM manual, but you're really talking about what it is and how it affects people because you know.
Yeah.
I hear that all the time. Like, how'd you know that about me? And I'm like, oh, believe me. Been there, done that. How many times, right?
Right.
Or met 3,000 other people in the last 2 years, right? So yeah. Everybody thinks that that's the challenges are unique to them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that nobody else has, struggles with it like I do. And they're always amazed when they hear that somebody else knows about this.
Right.
That if it's that well known that you're talking about it in my kitchen. Right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you find that when you're working with kids that oftentimes the parents are sitting there going, oh, that sounds just like me too.
Yep. And I have to be really careful with that, right? Because I'm not there to work with both the kid and the child, or the kid and the parent. That's not my job. My job is not to work with both of you. Because that's it's not appropriate for me to work with both of you.
Yeah.
So, and that's one of the reasons why I try to make that educational consultation the first thing that happens.
Yep.
Because, in that way I can help both of you at the same time. Right. And there's no conflict there because it's just information.
Right.
And then afterwards, if the parent is sort of charged enough about what's happened and what's going on, sometimes we have a conversation about like, all right, well, which of you do you want me to work with?
Mm-hmm.
Like, do you think that, and often this is a conversation with both mom and dad, but not always.
Yep.
And it's, do you think that working with me will allow you to better manage what you're coming from? And that will in turn sort of trickle down to the kid.
Right.
Or do you think that you're kind of like, it was really meaningful for you to hear all of this and it really changes the way you feel about some stuff that's happened, but is it really your kid that needs the help and you're sort of doing okay because you've already been navigating ADHD for the last 35, 40 years?
Right.
And so different answers depending on what's going on with the family.
Do you find though that, I mean, because you said that, you know, it's a systems issue,
mm-hmm.
and that when there is more than one person in the family that has ADHD, that creates a lot of the
mm-hmm.
difficulties that's happening in the family.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And a lot of what I do, like if I'm working with a kid, I'm still working with the parents.
Yeah.
But it's around parenting skills. It's not around ADHD skills.
Right.
So it's really aimed at the kid, even if I'm working with the parents. It's like, this is the way you want to communicate with them. This is what is going on. Like when your kid messes up and you yell at them, and in the process of yelling at them, you're solving the problem that created the mistake, right? You're not solving anything because all your kid is hearing is dad's mad, dad's mad, dad's mad.
Yeah.
And even though you just talked to them about how they should stay after school on Thursday to work with their teacher for the next month, they didn't hear that and they didn't process that.
No.
So when they come home on Thursday and get off the bus and you're like, why didn't you stay after? It's because they didn't hear you say that. Right. They don't know what you're talking about.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Different processing. Absolutely. I want to jump. We've got just a few minutes left. So you have this new podcast.
I do.
Talk to me about who's listening. Who are you talking to? What are you talking about on your podcast?
So the people who are listening are adults, but not adults necessarily with ADHD because it's parents that I'm aiming at. Yep. And I point out adults on purpose because I don't want people to think that it's a podcast for kids. It's not. Yep. We get to some pretty significant science concepts, and not adult concepts in terms of anything inappropriate, but just concepts that are above kids' head and they're going to get bored. So it's aimed at parents. It's aimed at primarily aimed at parents.
Yep.
On the side, secondarily, it's aimed at ADHD experts because you can never learn too much. It's aimed at teachers because you can never learn too much.
Yes.
So that's there sort of secondarily, but primarily I'm aiming at parents.
Yep.
And the people that I'm interviewing are ADHD experts because that matters. That's where we get a lot of our good information. Yep. I'm also interviewing parents to get that boots on the ground, what's it really feel like in your home kind of story.
Yep.
And also the me too, that other people are having the same challenges that I'm challenged by.
Yeah.
And then what I think makes my podcast unique is that I'm also interviewing teachers and school staff.
Yes.
Because kids spend 8 hours a day in school. And a lot of parents don't know what that looks like. Yeah. So my objective is to help them see what that looks like.
Yeah. P.S. Parents, it's different now than it was when you were growing up.
It's very different.
Yeah.
And so in the same way that I'm trying to encourage understanding and therefore empathy about ADHD and the struggles that kids with ADHD have and the struggles that parents with ADHD have, and the struggles of parents who don't have ADHD but are married to someone with ADHD or have kids with ADHD, those struggles too.
Yeah.
I'm also trying to create understanding and empathy for school staff.
Yeah. Because
as a former teacher, as a guy who works closely with schools still, I do workshops for schools and do trainings. There's a lot of people out there who are willing to blame the teacher and willing to blame the school for all kinds of stuff.
Yep.
And how come they can't just do this? Like I interviewed a school psychologist and it just came up. This is the episode that came up this week. And one of the things we talk about offhandedly, she's talking about like testing, right?
Yes.
And she goes, yeah. And then like, I go through the testing for like 12 hours and then blah, 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 blah. Right. And I was like, I just want to back up for a second. Because you just dropped 12 hours of like reviewing testing. Like it's nothing.
Right.
That's a long time.
Right. Yeah.
And parents don't see that side of it. The parents see, oh yeah, the testing took like 2 hours because that's how long the kid was there.
Right.
But then there's going through that data and collecting it and analyzing it and writing the report and all of that time. That 2 hour experience for your kid is a 14-hour experience for the tester, depending on what's happening.
Yeah.
And parents don't know that. They don't have that behind the scenes look. So I want to be giving that to them.
Absolutely. So I don't know if you knew this about me. I'm a psychologist, but I actually was the lead psychologist in one of our local school systems for a year.
Oh, cool.
And for many years I did neuropsych and psychoeducational evaluations. And yeah, it's a lot of work. And I actually stopped doing them a couple of years ago because I got a head injury. And because it takes so much effort to organize all of that information when you get it,
mm-hmm.
I had to stop because I didn't have the skill anymore to do that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I mean, what had
taken that happened.
like a couple days to do that in the past took me like 6 weeks.
Wow.
Because it was so frustrating to me to try and put it all together. And, I like to hope that that's resolved for the most part by now. But at the time, it was so difficult that I was like, no more. It's a hard job putting all that information together. So it's interesting that you interviewed a psychologist about that to give a perspective on really what's involved in doing psychoeducational evaluations. It's not just this thing.
And the intent of the interview was to talk about like transition from high school into college.
Yeah.
And kind of what does an IEP look like? What's a 504? What's testing? Like sort of that more technical end of it. But we wound up going into some more valuable stuff in a lot of ways.
Yes.
And I'm really glad that we headed in that direction.
It's also interesting, I think, to talk to parents about maybe questions that they can be asking and information that's important to offer when those evaluations are happening and when they're getting the feedback too.
Yeah.
And then I also have, my thought too was, I can remember doing those evaluations and I would make sure to come up with very specific suggestions that were for that kid in particular based on their challenges and strengths. And what I found was the school was often implementing the same like 10 strategies with every kid.
Yep.
And so it became, it was an interesting thing. So anyway.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense to me.
ADHD Essentials.
Yep.
Which is Brendan's podcast. Is it on iTunes?
It is. It's on iTunes. I think it's on all of the platforms.
Of the major podcast platforms.
As far as I know.
And what's your website, Brendan?
ADHDessentials.com.
You can find them there.
Yep.
And there's a contact page on that website.
There is. Or they can just email me at brendan@ADHDessentials.com.
Awesome. Any last words that you want to give to teachers, parents, adults, professionals about ADHD? Yeah,
I think going back to that roller coaster idea, the fact that it's not consistent.
Yeah.
My number one piece of advice on that is recognize that ADHD is inconsistent and don't punish your kids with success. Because if your kid gets a C on a test one day, and then the next week he gets an A, and the week after that he gets a C minus, and you say, hey, you got a C minus. Last week you got an A. Why didn't you get an A? Eventually, your kid is going to learn that they should stop getting A's because A's hurt. Because they're used against them later.
Yes.
So instead, every time the grade shifts up or down, in a very straightforward, pay very close attention to your tone, say to the kid, hey, what was different?
Yes.
Right? Like you got an A last time, you got a C this time, what was different? You got a C this time, you got a C last time, you got an A this time, what was different? Because that's going to help the kid recognize, oh yeah, when I go to bed on time, my grades are better. When I study for 20 minutes as opposed to 10 minutes, my grades are better, whatever's happening. And that's the information that's valuable. Your frustration, that information is not as valuable.
Yep. I think of ADHD coaching as being like a science experiment. You have to be curious, so you have to ask a lot of questions and look at things from different angles, and you have to be willing to experiment to figure out what is the formula that got me the A? What's the formula, what ingredient did I leave out that, maybe get a C instead? So
yeah, absolutely.
So Brendan Mahan, thank you so much for being a guest on Your ADHD Life.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. It was awesome. It feels like real life.
Totally. Okay, you're hysterical.
I try to be.
If you've enjoyed the show, please like us on Facebook at facebook.com/Your ADHD Life. This is Dr. Kirsten Milliken. Until next time, have fun and find ways to play.
I actually used to do that when I was a teacher. I would set reminders for when I had to go to the library and grade stuff.
Oh yeah.
And then, speaking of PlayDHD, it became like a contest for me to be at the library already grading when the reminder came in. Because it's like full of dopamine.
I have a time thing too. My time thing is when I'm going somewhere, I call ahead and tell them how many minutes it's going to be before I get there. And it's not like 10 minutes, 15. It's like, I'm going to be there in 13 minutes, right? I try and like forecast how far is it? How long do I think it's going to take me? And it's like it is a little game for me to see if I'm going to get there. All right. So.
No worries.
Okay, so I had a conversation with Deshaun Work today, and it was how to pronounce your last name. Because I was like, is it Mahan? Is it Mahan? Is it,
It's Mahan.
Mahan. It was a combination of the two.
Yeah, and the way to remember it is I couldn't name my son Holden because then his name would be Holden Mahan, which is...
But now every time I say your name, I'm going to laugh.
But you'll remember it, so that's what matters.
I totally am. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So I have a thing that, because people are always looking at my name and they say Kristen instead of Kirsten. And so how do you say your name? I say it's Kirsten. I said, so remember in my age generation, we watched the Carol Burnett show, right? And Carol Burnett came out and always pulled on her ear. I said, so red hair, Carol Burnett, Kirsten.
There you go. That's cool.
There you go.
I would have said Kirsten, so I'm glad that I totally would have in my head. That's because I read it too many times.
Mahan, and we've got Kirsten.
Kirsten, yep. And I wrote it down correctly so that I will remember.
Awesome. I always tell everybody's like, how do you spell your name? And I'm like, look, if you're just calling me back, just spell it phonetically because I don't care if you've spelled it right. I just need you to say my name right. So, all right, we're going to get started. Yay! With Brendan Mahan, as in holding my hand.
Right.